Hello and welcome back to the Age of Meaning. What is the religion of the future? What is the future of science? And how do we actually solve the meaning crisis? These are some of the questions that we discussed in today's episode. And thank you for joining us today. So, this episode is part 2 of a 2-part series. And if you haven't seen part 1, definitely check it out. Part 1 is titled How the West Lost Its Meaning and the History of Ideas. And in that episode, Florian gave us a great deep dive into the history of Western society and the history and the development of the Western intellectual tradition and how we found ourselves, what led up to this moment of the meaning crisis. In today's episode, we discuss the current state of the world and the current state of science and the current state of the religious ideas in the world today. We also focus more on the future of ideas and what the future of science and religion might be. In addition to that, we dived into non-duality and gave a kind of phenomenological account of the non-dual experience or why non-duality is true. And we also asked the question, is non-duality enough to solve the meaning crisis? So stay tuned for the answer to all these questions. And please like and subscribe and comment because that helps us out in the algorithm. So enjoy the episode. But I was wondering though, if, in terms of solving the meaning crisis and in terms of where we are right now in our worldview and this kind of vacuum of meaning and this kind of breaking apart with science revealing a more mysterious universe with the black hole and the quantum field and relativism and all that. And this kind of idea of there's this wisdom in the past, there's this wisdom in the East, there's this wisdom in the Western past that would be great for people to have, but we can't go back to it because you can't just go back to the past and just adopt these old beliefs because that wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't work. But then I wonder if maybe the solution is a kind of integral solution, which maybe, can you imagine it? I'm just wondering, just hypothesizing, I could imagine potentially a time in history, maybe not right now, but maybe in the future where people do actually see a kind of integral synthesis with ideas, and the new religion or the new worldview or the new metaphysics does kind of come from this this kind of integral synthesis syncretism, and that people in the future will develop new ways of thinking and develop higher levels of cognition and be able to have a kind of higher resolution understanding of the commonalities of world religions and philosophy. And people will kind of go into different traditions more and more. Some people will go more into X tradition and other tradition, but there'll be an understanding of the shared kind of underlying truth of it. Because, once you study these things deeply, you realize that there is an underlying truth that's approximatable in these traditions. And that it would kind of make sense if everyone was kind of having relating to that unity, that underlying unity, that underlying truth in different forms. Perhaps.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you think that's possible? Because otherwise, it's in my mind, you either have that, which is also, it's kind of unimaginable, but you have that, or you have, which is just kind of an upgrade in the level of consciousness. That would kind of be an upgrade in mankind's level of consciousness so that people could do that. But the other option is that there's kind of a new religion or a new mythology or philosophy that comes in. That's this new overarching meaning, which I don't see that as conceivable nowadays. I don't see it as
no.
possible.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting thought, and or it's interesting to think about it, right? Because I do think you're right. If you're just gonna engage with some form of esoteric thought or paganism or whatever, and you're I'm a Hermeticist or something, or I'm a Gnostic, and if you come up with some form of neo-Gnosticism or neo-Hermeticism or what have you, that it just becomes more noise that's added to whatever noise is already going on online, and it becomes another identity marker, and to kind of signal how you're special or how you're authentic or whatever. And it's part of the cult of narcissism or the cult of authenticity that you see on the internet nowadays. And so I don't think that there's a real solution there, no matter how valuable these traditions may be and how interesting these traditions may be. The idea that maybe you just learn from different traditions. You take from different traditions what you can. You kind of throw it in, and then you synthesize something within your vessel, like you're an alchemical vessel almost. That's that can transmute these different ideas, and they can synthesize in you. I think maybe there's validity to that. I think also, if I'm thinking about Jung, it's like what we need is the symbolic language to understand the contents of our own unconscious, to relate to that, and to engage with that. If we want to grow, if we want to individuate, if we want to integrate more of our unconscious, it's necessary to have these, symbolic orders to engage with. And it doesn't really matter if it's one thing or the other, as long as you connect with it. I think as long as it's effective for you, maybe that could be part of, what we need as a culture. I also think that instead of just, because that's also what that also is like, it's more consuming and curating, which is already what our culture is full of. Like, people aren't necessarily creating anything, they're just curating, they're just gathering things to signal their tastes and their identity. And it's like everybody's a DJ nowadays, like nobody's making anything, everybody's just curating.
Right.
And
so
and that's part of the problem, right? So I think
There's
also
too
what we
much
need,
stuff.
yeah,
Like, there's no need to make anything.
isn't yeah
Like,
exactly.
there's too much.
And I don't know, we need to connect with our creativity, I think, because in our creativity, there's something that gets channeled through us that doesn't necessarily originate with us. It's not part of our ego, sort of, deciding what it wants to be or do, but it's something that can, find a channel through you, and then find expression through you. And I think that's a good way to connect with your own unconscious, come up with new cultural forms that resonate deeply. And then I think if something resonates deeply with you and you can share that, the chances that it will also transfer widely are also bigger, I think. I also think that we just need to get together again in communities of people who, want a more meaningful life. And that, for instance, what you can do is, like, we don't have any rituals anymore, basically, no sacred rituals, right? But I think, we don't realize that it's available to us to just come up with rituals, to invent rituals in a playful way, right? You think up something, and then you assign special significance to it. You do that deliberately, then you engage with it, you go through the motions. It will have a real psychological effect, right? And then you create a ritual. And I think we have no choice but to do that, because there are no rituals available anymore. And it's like, we're not going to join a church if we're not going to join a church, or if we're not going to join a secret occult society, or like some kind of, existing group or whatever, to find significance and meaning. Then we need to come up with those things ourselves. We just need to get together like a bunch of kids and play around, do make believe, and just, go through the motions of a ritual, and set apart a time and a space where you do something that has special significance. If a kid can do that, truly believe it, why couldn't we? Why shouldn't we? Right? I think maybe that's what we need. That's what we need to start doing again.
Well, especially with the kind of, I'm surprised that didn't, well, I'm sure it has, the connection has been made between the kind of Kantian insight of the epistemic idealism, the fact that you create your sense of the world, and that you're always kind of in some way creating the world with your mind,
right,
or relating to it in some, there's some fundamental relationship to that. And so that's why that's also like a good kind of justification that you could add on to the idea of manifesting, where it's like, if you kind of focus on something so much that because you're creating your reality, because your mind is like rendering reality.
Yeah, you're doing that anyway. You might as well do it deliberately, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Otherwise, you're just doing it based on the set conditioning that you have.
Yeah. Then your culture is just going to condition that, and it's going to do that along very limited, lines, and it's just going to move you to consume more.
Yeah. I was also thinking though, like, what if you think about the current worldview, where does it come from? Well, it comes from science, and it comes from scientific discoveries and the kind of coagulation of science. So that's like, there's nobody sat down and invented the whole mythology of science, if you think about it. It was not like, so like Einstein was like, okay, we've created a new religion, it's called science. He stuck his tongue out or something. Like, no, this science emerged out of just lots of different thoughts and
Yeah.
kind of a way of thinking, and certain kind of core beliefs, like anchoring beliefs, like the Big Bang and objectivity and evolution. Probably like evolution and the Big Bang are like two core principles of science, which are
I
like,
would say and realism, right?
right. And but if you think about it, those kind of emerged like naturally, like they like emerged out of like many different thoughts and like beliefs and like things being condensed. And then the scientific method and the scientific community, which is like an established thing.
Yeah.
So in that case, like what if science would evolve? I mean, this is what other people talk about a lot. It's also like the idea like, well, science and non-duality, like one day science will confirm like the quantum field is God or whatever, or the quantum field is consciousness. So maybe the way that the worldview will change was through a similar thing as a scientific method, and that it will basically be like many different insights that are like integrated into humanity that
So I have
become
a
a new
question.
kind of way of thinking. Yes.
Well, if Jung says that the reason why Christianity spread so effectively is because, the symbol of Christ as the God man, as a symbol of the self, resonated deeply with something in our unconscious, then why would you think that scientific worldview spread so effectively? Why did it latch on? Why did the European mind assimilate that so readily?
That's a good question.
Was it just because they're convinced by rational arguments? Because
Probably, yeah.
you think so?
Maybe. I think it's possible. That could be an element. I mean, it also filled a vacuum. If it answered it answered there was a vacuum where Christianity no longer was satisfying.
It also fed into instrumental.
Right. Well, I think it's powerful. I think maybe the archetypal kind of element that it may have been answering is that it's very powerful. It has a sense of power to it. It's like we've discovered how the universe works. We've discovered the secrets of the universe, and we can do stuff with it, like create an atom bomb and stuff, or create technology. Originally it wasn't an atom bomb, but there's a kind of, I think there's a kind of like empowering. It's self-empowering. It's almost become like this ego aggrandizement thing to the human being in a sense. It's like, yeah, with our thinking, our original thought from first principles, we've derived how the universe works, which has a kind of mystical allure to it. That's why people love science, because they're like, wow, science is amazing because it's describing the universe. So I would say that if you think about it from the perspective of pre-scientific thought, and then being introduced to science, it would have an allure to it. It would be like, this is amazing. This is so intelligent. This is like the work of the gods, in a sense. I think that would,
and then maybe,
but it's,
maybe authority is just readily ascribed to science because of its rigorous methodology. It's like it's verifiable. It's based on measurements. It's based on repeatability. So we can just safely assume that what that gives us is going to be solid, right? And then we latch on to the kind of early working theories that it comes up with, which are kind of like part of classical science, like Newtonian physics, which make intuitive sense, but that the scientific project continues and actually is forced to reject the old theories. And then the scientists have to present something to society. It's like, yeah, this is what we found. Like, we don't know how to make sense of it, but like, sorry, here, this is now what you have to deal with and integrate. And then we're like, well, that doesn't make any intuitive sense. And I cannot corroborate that with my empirical, with what my empirical senses tell me. So that sort of then leaves us in a bit of an awkward position. It's like, okay, now who's responsible for actually making sense of that? Because the scientists are just reporting the facts that they're discovering,
Yeah.
But the public is just sort of kind of given over authority to the scientists to make sense of things, or the philosophers, I guess. But also the philosophers, they're not engaging with the inner world anymore, right? They're not engaging with the psyche in the way that the alchemists still did, for instance, or a theologian still did. And so we're left without a satisfying, system to integrate these insights. But still, we've discovered truths which is an improvement upon our earlier ignorance. It's just that we now have to catch up with the facts, right?
That's why science has been so effective, because discovering things like the Earth is not rotating around the sun, or the universe doesn't, the planets don't revolve around the Earth revolves around the sun. Like, if you just come and you're like, yeah, look, I can prove this. And then that's a massive, like, point that people is undeniable, and it's like power to that. It's like, wow, okay, we can understand the universe like this, and we were wrong the whole time. And that's going to give us instrumental power as well. That's probably why. And then people realize we have to go along with this because it's more true. And at the time, it was more true. Remember, from the shift from stage blue to stage orange in spiral dynamics, from the pre-cognitive to the cognitive era, where before there was a faith, blind faith and superstition, and moving into the stage orange rationalism is a major improvement, like a major development. So yeah,
I would say it still is. I would say it still is. For sure. with science proper, it's still just a methodological approach to come up with better and better theories about how things work. It's just that we've outsourced all of our sense making to science, and that was a mistake, because science cannot tell you, about how to live in a meaningful universe. Science cannot tell you why we exist, or what the purpose of it all is, and science cannot even come up with a satisfying unifying theory at this moment. So it leaves us with a kind of a fractured worldview, where at the large scale Newtonian physics apply, at the micro scale things break down and become sort of mysterious and weird, and so it's not science that's the problem, it's scientism. And it's like, outsourcing our ontology to science, and kind of forsaking any rigorous philosophy. Because if you commit to philosophy, then you have to accept the problem, and then we have to figure out a satisfying solution to the problem. And then, it becomes available to you to think, for instance, to go beyond these terms of dualism between the mind and matter, dualism between subject and object. Science cannot go beyond that, because science depends on that dualism for its epistemology, right? For its mode of coming to knowledge.
Sciences don't do epistemology. That's the problem. They basically don't do philosophy, which is why it's so... Scientists are so deluded sometimes.
No, but they shouldn't. They shouldn't.
No, they should. No, I mean...
Well, they have an epistemology.
They need to do epistemology to have a better epistemology, to not be stuck in their biases.
Yeah. Well, they have an epistemology that they're applying, but they're just not being reflective about that. They're not being reflective about that. Yeah.
Right.
And it needs to be made explicit that this, science departs from, dualism and operates within dualism. But dualism itself is an implicit, ontology, which actually there are alternatives to, that are just as much philosophically viable. That's why we need philosophy to put science in perspective. And that's why scientism becomes problematic, because, it establishes one form of ontology as a sort of absolute given thing, without acknowledging that it's actually based on a fundamental assumption. And that becomes problematic. But that's, that's more scientism than science proper.
Yeah, it's hilarious how you can give someone a whole existential crisis just by going through some scientific insights that are not integrated into science. They're not integrated into the worldview. Like, for example, the idea that atoms are empty. Like, atoms are made of empty space, and that there's little bits of energy. There's no, basically, if you cut an atom in half and then you keep cutting it into like a quark and then go down and down and down, then there's basically nothing there. There's no ground to it. There's just like little energy going on. So it kind of, if you zoom out an atom and to make it really big, it just becomes like it just becomes empty space. It's like physical matter is like, there's no like hard evidence of like what physical matter is at the core, at rock bottom. Maybe I'm butchering the science there. I don't exactly know, but
no, I think that's right. I think isn't it the case that I'll go on.
Also, the idea that Bernardo Kastrup has spoken about, where it's like, in the idea of consciousness in science, where consciousness is reduced to the brain, because materialism is true, so there's no such thing as consciousness, it's just brain. So the brain generates consciousness, and the brain is rendering reality. So you look at visual phenomena, and then they go into your eyes, the light goes into your eyes, and then it flips upside down for some reason, and it's processed in the ocular part of your brain, at the back of your brain. So your brain is rendering reality like a computer, which means that the room out here is actually not out here. You're never actually seeing the room. You're only ever inside your brain. So it's actually it's actually really solipsistic and weird to think about the fact that, according to science, you're stuck in your brain the whole time. You're experiencing a rendering of reality in your brain. So you're in my brain, and I'm in your brain.
Yeah. Even your own brain or your own body is just a rendering in your brain, right?
Right.
Which is, which is
your
crazy.
body is just like rendered in your brain. It's really weird.
And so what is outside of that actual brain? What is outside of that actual brain? It's like we have no idea.
You know? No idea. It's completely mysterious.
It's transcendent. Yeah.
It's kind of terrifying.
So you can have transcendent realism where you say like, yeah, there is some kind of objective reality that's mind independent, but it's transcendent. There's nothing to be said about that. You know, it's just there as a mysterious realm. Well, and I think that kind of also opens the door to, I don't know, a different way of framing that becomes non-dual, or that becomes like a neutral monism or something like that. I don't know. Because then the idea might be like, well, that thing that exists outside of your brain, which is transcendent, which you can never really touch or know, you're inclined to juxtapose that to your conscious awareness as if those two are categorically different things. But then the idea is that actually, no, that those are the one and the same thing. There's no difference.
Wait, say that again.
So if you think about this idea that, okay, so you're rendering an image of reality in your brain, and whatever you perceive is actually happening within your brain. So everything I'm perceiving now around me, all of this is in my brain. It's like my hands feel like they're moving outside of my brain, but actually they're moving in my brain, where there's a little image of my brain and the hands. And then the question is like, so what exists outside of that actual brain, right? The actual brain in which everything is rendered, so to speak. Or maybe it's actually not fair to speak about a brain anymore, because brain already supposes that it has a material existence, where really it all exists within my mind, right? And the idea of brain also exists within my mind. So everything is held within my mind. Then the question is like, so what is that reality supposedly that I'm engaging with, which exists outside of my mind? Well, then you could say like, yeah, there is something like that, the reality. It's just that we can never really touch that or say anything about it. In other words, it's transcendent. So there's transcendent realism. It's like there is a reality that's independent of my mind, but it's transcendent. We can never say anything about it. Can never touch it. You know, there's an epistemic gap. And then that opens the way to the idea that, like, well, actually, that reality that you suppose is, independent of your individual mind, and that you suppose exists outside of it, which you kind of conceptualize as something other to your mind. Like you have your mind, and there's that thing that's beyond it, that's outside of it, that's other to it. The implicit dualism there actually is not necessarily philosophically warranted. You might as well take the position that you say like, well, that thing that I suppose to be other to my mind, the transcendent real, is actually also mind. That is mind and I am mind. In a way, we partake of the same substance, and the division between the two is actually just an emergent element of that very rendering that I'm constantly producing in my mind. But if it weren't for the fact that I was producing that rendering, then it would just be the one thing. And if you can sort of disengage from your senses, if you can disengage from your sense experience, which comes from being, so-called embodied, and just connect with your mind in its pure essence, then you can actually transcend that dualism and experience reality as something, in a way, which is beyond mind and object. It's beyond the subject and object dualism. It exists as a ground of being. It exists as an eternal, unmanifest reality, which often gets certain attributes assigned to it, like light and life, and that it's possible for you to actually experience that as, your deepest and truest self, right?
Absolutely.
And that's a completely philosophically valid position. And moreover, there have been like dozens of spiritual traditions throughout the ages, throughout different cultures, including the West, which have said exactly that. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's crazy. I think one of the things is that the boundary between yourself and the outside world is taken for granted. But it's really just, what is it actually? Like, it's actually just a feeling. It's an intuitive feeling that there's a boundary between yourself and the world. But really, if you just look closely into it, that feeling itself doesn't, that feeling can basically be examined, and then you can realize that it's actually just like an illusory thought, basically. And there actually is no distinction. It's very weird to think about, but you have your body, obviously, there is some level of distinction. But in a sense, like everything that you're perceiving is basically just like vision. That you're basically seeing your vision. You're seeing vision happening, and you're feeling touch happening, and you're hearing sounds happening, and it's just kind of like emanating out of you in a way, or it's emanating into you. But it's like continuous. There's literally no border between it, because you have your body, then there's like the feeling of your skin on the air, but then that feeling itself is a border, is a barrier. But then that feeling itself is like collapsed into the duality. It's like, okay, well, that's just a feeling. Like there's the air, and then there's like the skin, and there's like the eyes, and then the external world. And it's like, well, okay, well, I'm over here. Like I'm a perspective. Like I exist as a perspective, and I have an identity over here. But I'm like a wave in the ocean of like perception going on in general. But I'm like the perceiver. But it's one like whole experience.
Yeah, it's like everything can, like all of those things that are part of the phenomenal experience that you're having, all of that could fall away. And then there's something left that's just pure being. And that pure being is universal in nature. There's no more individuality to it. It's kind of like it's universal and omnipresent. And all of the phenomena that you experience, kind of, they always go with this, this apparent dualism. But really, you might as well, take the position that all that is it's only an as if. It's as if you have a body. It's as if you are an entity. It's as if there is a world in which you are an entity, in which you can move around. It's as if you have a sense perception. And that as if is so constant. There's such a continuity to that as if that we take it for granted as an absolute structure of reality itself. Right? But then we raise that to a level of ontology, which actually then disinhibits us from experiencing that fundamental reality, which is beyond the dualism. And so you have to operate on that as if level of dualism, because that's your fate. That's what you're here for, in a way. That's what you're engaging in this three-dimensional reality in for. But you should, I don't know, maybe not raise that to that absolute level of ontology, because then you forgo having this deeper experience of a
deep unity, which is the most beautiful thing. It's the most beautiful thing that one can imagine, because it puts you into like the heart of the universe. It puts you into connection and communion with reality. And you also realize that reality is alive, because reality is part of you, and you're alive. And your aliveness is part of this grander aliveness. This kind of infinite aliveness, which is just generated you.
Right. Which is undying.
Yourself. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so it's like kind of like the greatest thing of all time. It's kind of like the greatest feeling. It's like the Holy Grail. Because then you're no longer a stranger in the world. Right. Then you're like, I am the world. Then you're like, this is that. You're in touch with the absolute. And
it's like you kind of,
continue.
Well, you, or what you think of as you, and the world both partake of one essential being, and that essential being is your true self, and that is actually undying, which is why in the Hermetic spirituality they say that actually this ordinary life that we think of as life is actually death. this is actually the realm of death, because in this relative existence, you're forced to perish in your carnal state, and maybe find a new existence in another incarnation or something like that. And this other realm, which is beyond the duality of self and other, or self and world, what we associate with death, is actually the true life, because that being that is universal, of which both world and self partake, is actually undying and ever present,
And it's literally, that's the formless being, formless dimension, formless reality, which is literally also always present in this world of form.
Right.
It's just see-through, basically. It's transparent to your mind, as your normal mind is. But then also when you're alive, that formless being is arranging itself in these particular ways. It's because it's taking this form. It's like Shiva and Shakti. It's like this form that's going on in this way. But when you die, then that form goes away, but it just basically reconfigures, I guess, into either another form or just into the formless dimension. And that's the other thing, that idea of death, death not being an end, a finality. If you're just a body, if you're just a brain, then death is the end. But that actually goes against every single religion and spiritual tradition, which a lot of people say is a kind of cynical view, is that it's, well, we're afraid of death, so we invented this theory to help us feel better about it. But yeah, I mean, if you, there's so many things to say about that, like the near-death experience literature is just and all of the accounts of death in like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, for example, things like that, are so detailed and rigorous and interesting. But also just on a level of, if you're operating in a non-dual consciousness view, and your consciousness, and you're not dual, you're one with everything, then you're not the body, and then your body doesn't die because you're consciousness. So there's actually no reason to think that you would die permanently and like switch off completely forever, because that would only make sense if you're the brain. But you're not the brain. So it's almost like with modern thought and modern philosophy and kind of non-dual philosophy, we've kind of like salvaged the idea of the soul or the spirit. You would have the whole thing is like, yeah, well, you have a soul. In the kind of contemporary spiritual language, it's like, well, we're consciousness, which actually makes sense on an analytical, philosophical level. And therefore, your consciousness doesn't die because it's not your brain.
Yeah.
Which is pretty good news.
And the cool thing is that you don't have to go to Advaita Vedanta, even though that's a beautiful and sophisticated tradition. But you can find actually, very similar teachings with their distinct flavor and their distinct characteristics in, our own history, in European history.
Yeah, and in contemporary times. I mean,
right.
Just to add, I mean, you can read Bernardo Kastrup. He's a contemporary, respected philosopher, academic, quantum physicist. Or you can read, you can read Husserl, you can read Hegel, you can read, what's his name? George Berkeley, the idealist, English idealist. I mean, it's a multiplicity of ideas that kind of touch on this.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No, that's right. Or like Neoplatonism, for instance, Plotinus system. And it's been really cool to read this book, Hermetic Spirituality and the Historic Imagination, by Wouter Hanegraaff. Wow, this is really cool to read that.
Non-duality, yeah. And there's also the Aztec non-duality, which we're going to talk about that one day.
So do you think that in non-duality that we find a satisfying solution to the problem of meaning that we kind of got stuck with after the scientific enlightenment and this historic process that was a part of?
It's a great question. I would say it definitely plays a role. It's a key role. There's something key to that insight, to that ontology, which is a fundamental thing, because I think there's a deep truth to it. There's a literal truth to it. Like, it's like, that is truth. There's something in that, which is a very fundamental truth, which is the reason that it shows up across cultures and across time. And it's directly verifiable for people. And so there's something there, which is like, sorry?
Well, that the thing is also that there's a participatory way of actually realizing that.
Right. It's directly verifiable by you. Yeah, that's also a key thing. So it's not just metaphysics That's also the critique of Hegel that Kierkegaard made that you mentioned earlier, which is also the critique that Husserl made of Hegel, which is that, talking about Edmund Husserl, by the way, also German idealist, he said, like, well, no, there's all this speculative metaphysics going on, but we need to bring it back to like direct experience. Literally, what is subjectivity? Because you can just speculate all day and create this whole intellectual system, but if it's just ideas and it's just words and it doesn't give you truth, you see, like truth is like real truth is found in participatory knowledge, I think, because conceptual propositional logic, propositional knowledge is always partitioned. It's always like integrated. You know, like in the Hegelian system, that's like the what do you call it? The integration and
the dialectic.
Yeah, the separation of things and then the reintegration, like
differentiation and
differentiation. When things are articulated and differentiated, which is a beautiful thought. I was thinking about that recently. I was like, that's why when you're understanding reality, you make distinctions between things, many distinctions. That's how your mind understands reality in some ways. But I think when it comes to absolute truth, then it's a participatory knowing. It's perspectival knowing. It's not propositional, because propositional knowledge is always finite. And so that's where I think the non-dual thing is essential to solve the meaning crisis, to address this kind of modern situation that we're in. But I think there needs to be something more to it. I don't know. Non-duality itself is it's kind of like this core, maybe, that other things could be built around it, other elements, because you also need you need a relative dimension of, you need relative meaning as well. You need relative explanations for why the world is the way it is. You need to account for human life and the world.
And the psyche, right?
Yeah.
And the psyche with its contents and its complexities. And I think we need certain structures that can mediate our human experience. And I think this symbolic order is essential. It's not optional in that. And that we need the symbols, because the symbols have a therapeutic effect, as Jung shows, right? So we need an appropriate language for that. And I think what Jung gives us is also very useful analytic language of talking about the unconscious that's actually rational and empirical, right? It's like it's based on empirical observation. It's not just a hypothetical, it's not just a theoretical concept. It's based on empirical observation. And it gives us a language to talk about that is not dogmatic, right? And that is not, based on religious doctrine or something like that, but still shows us that what we need to engage with is something that's supra-rational, that's beyond what we can rationally grasp. And that if we want to integrate these contents, which we really have no choice but to do that, it's either repress or integrate, and we know what repression leads to, then, we need something that can mediate between us from where we stand, which is the vantage point of the ego, and those contents which lie in the unknown parts of our own psyche. There are different orders of symbolic language, but they all partake of a similar category, right? And that turns out to be the very category that we've discarded over sort of the process of secularization and scientific enlightenment unfolding. And so I personally think that it's not optional, and that we need to re-engage with that. And there's definitely many different ways in which we can do that. And then I think that has to be embodied and lived. So we need ritual, and we need community. We cannot expect to just be satisfied with intellectual precepts.
I think it has to be. I think that's right, and I think it has to be multi-level, complex solution to a complex problem, and it probably will be like that. It'll be an emergent many solutions to many problems. Like, you need psychology, you need to integrate the unconscious. People need to do that in general. You need philosophy. Like, you need good epistemology in life. Otherwise, the world is a big problem. If there's bad epistemology, and anything goes, and people will believe anything and be swayed by populism and whatever. So you need epistemology you need psychology, you need metaphysics, you need to understand what the world actually is. You need to understand ontology, you need psychology, you need a spiritual relation, you need participatory knowledge. You need all these kinds of things. And I feel like what will probably happen is that it's out of one person's control. And I mean, if society does have a telos or an evolution of consciousness going on, which I've always thought it makes a lot of sense intuitively because the world has progressively gotten better and better over the last thousands of years. People have gotten more conscious and more intelligent over thousands of years. More complexity has emerged. I think that what will happen is that all these kinds of solutions will be applied and people will become more conscious and more complexity of intelligence will happen. And eventually I feel like the kind of the little egg of materialism, the kind of clay cosmology of materialism that we have now will eventually crack and it won't be able to withstand the complexity that's going on.
Mhm.
And so then it'll break apart and more it'll become a vacuum and then things will fill that vacuum. And maybe now with the age of information and the relativism going on, like, I don't know, more ideas will be allowed, and then maybe it'll be like a marketplace of ideas and the best ideas will win out. I don't know.
Yeah. Do you think that new sources of authority will emerge? That there will be new individuals that come to the fore and can kind of lead when it comes to wisdom? Because like we know a lot, but we haven't necessarily become wiser, and we don't really know who to turn to for wisdom. But there are people around, who have a set of experiences that give them maybe special authority, or yeah, what do you think? Because people are
Well, what I want,
skeptical. People are skeptical of authority nowadays, right? It's
well,
like you can't trust
that's kind of,
anyone. How do you know somebody's not corrupt? Won't abuse their power? It's like we're skeptical of power and authority.
well,
Yeah.
that's what I actually meant to add to what I just said is that I think it'll be like how science develops.
Hmm.
The scientific worldview has emerged out of many different observations and thoughts, and then it's kind of congealed into a worldview. So maybe also through science, like eventually there'll be a paradigm shift in science, which will force to discard the old Newtonian worldview.
Very interesting
You know,
thoughts.
maybe that could be the way that these things happen, but it's not going to be like tomorrow or in 50 years even, or maybe, well, I don't know, the world gets weirder and weirder like every day. This like novelty wave, Terence McKenna theory going on for sure. So who knows?
Right. Good place to wrap it up, maybe.
Maybe, yeah, that's a good place to wrap it up, I think.
So
How long have
if
we
you've
done? 2 hours, 15 minutes. Okay.
yeah, with a little break in between. So if you've been listening and or watching, thank you for your attention. Please, like and subscribe and tag along for the ride as we explore some of these topics and related things.
Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.